Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to Wood by Wright 2. Today we are going into a little bit more detail on making the headboard and footboard. We're going to be putting in the stiles, all of the grooves going around, as well as cutting the arches, which are on the bottoms of the stretchers in the middle and the bottom, as you can see those here on the footboard and the headboard. They just aren't on this top one here because we'll be putting in some grill work in here eventually. So yeah, they're starting to look like a headboard and footboard, and the next time we'll be putting in the main panels. But let's dive in and take a look at this. Finally getting back to the bed, and we're going to be having some fun today. The first thing I want to do is actually cut the arches on these stretchers. But before that, I need to build a drawing bow that is long enough for this. The drawing bow I built in the past was only about, I think 4 foot long, and I need something longer. So if you want to see a video on how I built the drawing bow, I have a whole video on that as well. But basically, it is just a thin piece of wood with a string going from end to end that you can tension. And I have this little block here that is basically a tent toggle that you can run the string through, and that will then tension the piece. I probably didn't need to put a string on this one because the bow is so light that I could just clamp it in place and hold it there. But in this case, I just decided to put the string on it because I may want to use it in the future. It really didn't take that much more time. Using a little bit of heat from the torch seals off the ends so that they don't fray and makes them a lot easier to work with. It's always good to have a propane torch in the shop. So we can tie this off, connect them up, and voila, we have a drawing bow. And this thing is a lot of fun, gives you a really nice even curve from end to end without having to mess with anything. So I want them to start about 2 inches in from either end of the stretcher, and I mark those out, and then that gives me the point at which the drawing bow needs to connect with the edge of the board. And then it goes up, I believe, about 2 inches in the middle as well. Once that's locked in place, then I can draw the pencil and mark it in. And there I have my mark on the first board. Now, in order to do this, I'm actually going to use whatever I cut off of this one and use that to mark all the other boards so that they're all precisely the same. But for the first one, you need a drawing bow or some way of making that cut. Now let's actually slice in. I want to cut down to that line every 2 to 4 inches or so along. That's nothing particular. If the wood is gnarly, then you might want to do them closer together. If the grain is nice and straight, you might want to do them a little farther apart. But that is a personal preference. I think I ended up doing them on the twisted ones about 2 inches apart, and the ones that were fairly straight were about 3.5, 4 inches apart. Then we can come in with a chisel, bevel down, and start chopping out. If you're unsure of the grain, stay away from the line as long as you can, as far as you can, and keep it back. And then once you get close, then you can come in and pare it out. And so you can see on this one, I'm pretty sure how the grain is going, so I can chop it in fairly close, and then come back and clean it out close to the line. I'm not getting right down to the line, but close to it. This one, the grain was going a little bit more wild, so I had to take it a little higher up and then a little lower down until I could then bring it back in tight to the line. You can see how this is basically going to go from one end to the other. Chop it out, clean it up, chop it out, clean it up. And I'm going around that knot there, which is a little wild. But in this case, the grain is going really well, and so I can take a deep chop right at the bottom and then come back in with a few pounds and bring it close to the line. Now that we have all of these fairly close to the line, I'm going to grab a spoke shave. And in this case, with the flat bottom, I know I'm doing a rounded work, but the curve is so slight that the flat bottom works fine. And I'm going to generally smooth it all out. I'm going to get it fairly close. This is going to leave a few bumps and ridges that are larger, and then I can come in with the compass plane and remove those bumps and ridges. The compass plane will give me a really nice smooth curvature from one end to the other. Checking with the eyeball, making sure nothing's sticking up or looking weird, and then bring it in. Make sure you go with the grain so you can hear him stopping at the knot where it runs out, turn around, and then go back the other way to clean out that mess. Gives you a nice clean surface. And now we are happy. That's one of the few times you get to use a compass plane, but when you do get to use it, it's so worth it and so much fun. Here you can see how I will clamp one to the next board and then use the previous board to mark off all of the other stretchers that I need to put this curve in. And if you don't have a pencil sharpener in the shop, you do. It's called a plane. I have like 3 or 4 pencil sharpeners on tools and on other things, but I usually grab a plane or a chisel to sharpen the pencil. I just find it easier. Now we need to put a groove in all of the boards so that we can put in the panels in between all of these. And this is a 1/4 inch groove cut in a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch deep. And we're going to be putting it in all of the verticals that we roughed out earlier, as well as in the top of the bottom stretcher and the bottom of the top stretcher, and then into the legs as well, because we want all these panels to connect in. And so this is a good time to get to know your Stanley 45 or to make your own grooving plane. I have my own grooving plane that works pretty well, but anytime I get to use a Stanley 45, it's just a very comfortable plane and a lot of fun. So you do that. Also, if you want to join us live, I do put this out for patrons and members here on YouTube, so you can click the join button and I post those up there. Most of the time when I'm in the shop, I'll turn the live on so people can follow along and watch what I'm doing and ask questions. So this is the top of the bottom stretcher. It's a nice flat joint and fairly easy to run a groove all the way along. It makes it, just the way you expect it to be. But then you have to think about, what about the bottom of the top stretcher when you have to put a groove into the curved surface? And this is where things kind of become fun. I can still use the Stanley 45 to do the ends here and bring those down to where they need to be. But then you get into this curvature, and you can do a little bit, as you can see I'm doing here, and you go down in there, but as soon as you start getting into the curve, the sole bottoms out. So what I do is I just drop the blade a little bit deeper, and then I do a little bit more. And I think I end up dropping the blade 3 or 4 times on this just to get it down to depth. So it doesn't take that much more, but once you chop it down a little ways, you're going to get a lot of heavy curls coming out right off the bat, and then the last few you can make them nice and clean. You're basically just using the heel and the toe of the sole as that slides around the curvature. Once you do as much as you can, drop it down, go back and do some more, and then drop it down and go back and do some more. It's a fairly repetitive process, but it's amazing what this actually does. It gives you a really nice curvature from one end to the other. And by the end of it, when you drop it down the last time, the amount the blade sticks down below develops your curvature from heel to toe, if that makes any sense. And then I can just use my depth gauge to make sure that I'm at depth all the way along, about 1/4 inch actually. I think I did a little bit more just to be on the safe side. So once we have that groove cut, then we can move on to cutting the grooves in the legs. I believe that's next. Now the grooves in the legs are a little bit different in that we have to stop them at both ends. They need to correspond with the mortises that we cut for the stretchers to go into. We don't want them to go higher than those, and we don't want them to go lower. So you can't use a long grooving plane because the sole isn't short enough to fit into the slots. So in this case, I'm actually going to use the router to cut the depth. Now the router does have this little sole thing that you can put down in front of it that supposedly makes it easy enough to do that. But I have never found that to work very well, and so I find it easier just to run it, crank it down a step farther, tighten it back down, run it a little farther. It doesn't take that much time at all to get it down to depth. And here again we can check it with the depth gauge and make sure that it fits and is the exact same depth as others all the way around. And there, we're happy. Now we can start putting these together because we actually need to do the verticals and do all of the mortise and tenons between the verticals. But to do that, we need to know precise measurements between the two stretchers with the curvature in mind, and that really gets kind of mind-boggling. So I'm going to put the legs in here, take it over to the bench, and we can measure those out. Next, we need to figure out exactly where these verticals will go, and I want one to be centered, and then I want the other two to be centered between the center one and the outside legs. So I'm going to measure the distance between them, mark out exactly where center is, and then mark 1 inch on either side of that because these spindles are 2 inches wide. Actually, they're slightly wider than 2 inches. I think they're like 2 32 inch, and that's fine because I'm going to be planing them down a little bit later. So whether you're going to make it queen size or king size, the measurement between these verticals really doesn't matter as long as it is exactly halfway between the two legs, and then the other ones are halfway between the center and the two legs. So I just measure out where that halfway mark is, and then mark 1 inch on either side, and that allows me to put the verticals exactly where they need to be. And then I can mark out on the board where they interact and where they intersect with the stretchers. And on this one here, it's on a curved surface, and on this one here, it's a perfectly flat surface. And so this allows me to then cut them to match the curvature at that point. So if my curve isn't exactly perfect, then that's okay because I can match it to what reality is. So we can just one by one set them in place, make sure they're all lined up, and then draw our curve on there. And we'll know when we put those in place, it will match that spot exactly. Now what I want to do is cut these to tenon length, and I have these about 1.5 inches, 2 inches longer than they need to be. So I'm going to make a mark about a 1/2 inch away from that shoulder line that I just drew. So I'm not making it anything specific because I can cut the mortise to be whatever depth the tenon is. I just need to slice this off, and this will determine how long that tenon is away from the shoulder of the vertical. So we can slice off that extra 1/2 inch or so on the end of each one of these, and then we can actually get to working on the tenon joinery on the end of these. And this is just, I don't know, satisfying to cut off these little pieces. Just fun. So on the square ends, it's nice. I can just put the square up against it, and I can run a marking line all the way around the board, right on that line that I just drew that matches with the flat edge of the stretcher. But on the other ends where I have to go against the curved edge, I need to be a little bit more careful with those. In this case, the curvature is so slight that I can actually use a bevel gauge and bring that into line. So I'm going to set up the bevel gauge with the line that I drew, and then I'll bring it up to the edge, and I'll use a square to draw the line across the edge of the board. And then I'm going to bring the bevel back over, flip it over, and put the beveled edge on the exact same angle on the other side, if that makes sense. And this way I can make sure that the bevel on one side is the exact same as the bevel on the other side. So now I have a line that I can cut to, and I want to cut down to the groove, because the groove is the size of my tenon. It makes it very easy for measuring that out. That way my groove is in the exact same place on the stretchers that they're going to go into. So I can slice down to the depth of the groove, put the chisel in here, and I can just pop these out. And this is so much fun when they just go pop, and suddenly the tenon appears. I don't know why, but I find this step incredibly enjoyable, and it's just so easy to slice down to the depth you need, and then bring in a chisel and pop them out. And so we're going to be doing this a little bit here, but a lot of fun. And this is a good chance just to practice your skills a little bit, make sure everything is copacetic and clean, and then have a little bit of fun here. Here you go, ready? Pop. I have a larger chisel in here that spreads the whole width of the tenon. I think it's 1.5 inches. And you can set it in here and pop, there's a tenon. Just that simple. And very enjoyable, a very clean way to work, and it gives you a nice smooth surface. If the grain isn't going perfectly vertical, you have to be careful with this method. On one side you can chop it out and then clean it back. On the other side you have to stay away from the line and chop it out and then clean it back. So now that we have the verticals all done with the tenon work, we need to figure out where the mortises will go. And we have the lines drawn on this board already for where the verticals need to be, but then we need to set the vertical in place and mark out exactly where the tenon is. Then we can come into the chisel and chop this down. Now these are only about 1/4 inch deep, so they don't require that much. So I'm not going to do my normal mortising work. I'm going to chop in at either end and then pare in the distance. Just a little bit easier than doing a normal tenon chopping. This goes a little bit faster. And then we work them in until they slide all the way into depth. And voila, we have a vertical in the joint. And so we just keep doing this all the way along until all of them are in and clean and exactly what we're looking for. This is one of the few times where I use a pencil because I can't get a knife into that mark and get a nice clean edge. And it doesn't have to be absolutely precise about where this goes. If they're a little bit sloppy, that's okay. The panels and everything are going to be holding them in place, so there really isn't any need for this. It's not a structural joint. So those of you who think 1/4 inch just isn't enough, it's okay. Yeah, here my cameraman was playing with his new toy. It does make for some interesting times. A lot of fun in the shop. And if you do like this work, Luke is the videographer and does some amazing work. I do the editing, but he comes over and shoots these shots so I can get some interesting things for you. So now we can actually start doing the assembly on here. And we're going to pop together these boards, clamp everything down, and hold it into place. This just allows me to do some of the final checking, and we can get the measurements for the panels that need to go in between these. And we can fit in the boards, pound them all down into place, and make sure that everything is the way we want it. Make sure that all the joints are nice and tight and everything is clean. This is a leather-faced mallet that I made a while ago. If you want to see that, I think the video is called Making a Finishing Mallet. You can tap them all in, and then to get the final bit out, and I want to get these nice and tight to make sure all my measurements are exact, I'm actually going to bring over some beam clamps and clamp these down, and that draws everything in really nice and tight. In the final, when I go for the glue up, I'm going to be using drawbar tenons, and so that will actually be what tightens them down. But for this, I want to lay those out. And then I'm also going to be marking the tenon where they intersect the leg. Not to cut them off there, but in the future I'm going to trim the ends so that they have a pillowed end. This makes it much easier to do it afterwards, because I'm going to take this apart another time so that we can get all the panels installed. So once these are marked, the next time I can pull them apart, we can actually trim them off. This is also a good chance where you can come through and just check, is everything square, is everything the way you want it to be? And I was very happy. All my joints came out just about right, within tolerances. Now for the headboard, it's a little bit bigger, so I did this one down on the floor rather than on the bench. You can wiggle in all of these into joint, flip it up on edge, and then you can put the base down into the leg, and then the leg down onto the top. And you have your headboard basically done. Yeah, this is one of those fun points when you can start to see things come to life. This is the first time that the headboard had been fully assembled, and just to see its size and make sure that it came out the way I wanted it made everything very, very happy. And again, if you're going to make a king size, as mine is for a queen size, all you have to do is make these stretchers a little bit longer, and then all of the verticals match out to that. So now that the headboard is done, we can then clamp that together as well, make sure that all of those joints are the way they need to be, and then come in with a marking knife and mark off the edge of the tenons on this. And I think that is about it. This is one of those things that's just absolutely enjoyable. And I'm really looking forward to the next step where we create the panels and get those put into all the grooves we created, because now we have, well, it's a headboard and a footboard, and you actually bring my wife in here and see, you know, is this what you want? Now's your time to speak, otherwise it's going to be finished. So yeah, a lot of fun. So there you have it. They're starting to come together and I'm getting excited. So next week we'll be working on the panels and possibly some of the grow work on here, although we might do some of the sliding dovetails for the top shelf. We'll see how that comes along. But I'm really getting excited and looking forward to this thing, so I hope you are. If you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, let me know in the comments down below. And also, if you'd like to see the whole build series thus far, I'll have a link to the playlist down in the description below. So I think that's about it. If you did like this, please like, comment, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. And also, I'm completely supported by you, the viewers. I don't have any sponsors on this channel, so I hope you like that. I think that's about it for now. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And the headboard's connected to the footboard, or not yet.